Hi, Misha here, and on my ongoing look at Japanese warships, we're into the cruisers. We've looked at the heavy cruisers so far, the Yuritaka, the Oba, the Takeo, and so on. And the Takeo was really designed to have a heavy torpedo armament, and was definitely a heavy cruiser, but the Japanese Navy was only allowed so many heavy and so many light cruisers per the terms of first the Washington Naval Treaty and then later the London Naval Treaty. So in 1931 they decided to build to the limit of light cruisers as well, and that's where the Mogami-class comes from. These were built with an eye towards anti-aircraft armament, having a dual-purpose main battery. What an interesting effect. They were built to be fast, and they needed to be as light as possible to do everything that they wanted, and that ended up actually getting them a lot of criticism, because they really did try to cram a lot in with an initial weight of allegedly 8,500 tons. In reality, the initial weight was more like 10,900 tons, but still, for that, on paper, it had a lot. It's a little bit shorter than the Takeo class at about 660 feet, but it has more crew at about 850. Has a very nice top speed of 37 knots, and it had a pretty impressive battery. But we'll talk about that in just a second. From Eaglemoss here, we have 4 different members of the class, the 4 that were made. Up top, we have Kumano in original configuration circa 1938. Then we have Suzuya in 1940 configuration. Then we have Mikuma in 1942 configuration. And then we have Mogami in her final 1944 configuration as a aircraft cruiser. Quite interesting. And so you see they're all pretty different, and the design definitely changed before and during World War II. So here's Kumano in her original class configuration. Honestly, she would not be in this configuration for very long at all. Officially, in this styling, she is a quote-unquote light cruiser. I know. What makes her a light cruiser? Well, according to the terms of the London Treaty, under 10,000 tons, okay? And her guns. You know, looking at our other ones over here, we have 8-inch guns. Okay, well, 7.9 or 8. But yeah, that's okay for a heavy cruiser. But a light cruiser, because of various clauses and stipulations and things that France had done, the largest gun they could really put on a light cruiser was a 6.1-inch gun, which was actually a new gun for Japan. This would also help on the weight thing. So we have the 6.1-inch gun, and we have a lot of them. We have 5 turrets with 3 each, so 15 6.1-inch guns. On top of that, they are dual purpose with an elevation of up to 55 degrees, which is pretty much found to be kind of the optimum. We also have several torpedoes. We have these kind of turreted triple launcher setups. Kind of an interesting, very Japanese thing. We have a couple of float planes. And they did other things to save on weight. For one, they went to a minimalist superstructure. They also combined the funnel, reducing weight there. They took 2 boilers out, going down from 12 to 10 to save on weight. And they used aluminum alloy where possible, and they used electric welding instead of riveting or other methods where possible to save on weight. Sounded good. It basically met the terms of the treaty. You know, at least they showed that they were trying, and yeah. None of the powers really completely stuck to things. It was all playing games with loopholes and whatnot. However, there was a problem with the Mogami-class. Because of all the stuff that they wanted on board, these things were quite top-heavy. And because of the lighter metals and the welding used, they were quite weak. Soon after gunnery practice was performed the first few times, they noticed cracking already in the welds and the joints. Welding is perfectly fine for some things, but other things you really need heavier and riveted parts. And her seakeeping just wasn't awesome. On the other hand, having a top speed of 37 knots, that's pretty great for 1930s. And while she doesn't have the biggest guns, 6.1 inch, for a light cruiser, she does have a lot of them. However, in 1936, Japan decided to walk out and not sign the Second London Naval Treaty. So, beginning on December 31st, they were really no longer obligated to anything. And so these triple 6.1 inch mounts would quickly go away. And even from the beginning, they designed them so that they could easily and readily be replaced with the twin 8 inch turret that you've seen on most of the other cruisers. And that is exactly what they ended up doing. It just occurred to me that I'm doing these actually in reverse of when they were initially launched, but yeah, Kumano was the last one. The third one was Suzuya. She was pretty much launched in 1934 and commissioned in 1936, and immediately put back in the dock for a retrofit because of the problems with the first two in her class. She would receive more of a bulged hull to try to help with stability, and she would have improved welds and metallurgy. So she gets out from that in 1937. Well, as I said, they've abrogated the treaty system, so there's really no longer a need to have her with the 15 6.1 inch guns. So she goes right back in for another refit, giving her the 8 inch guns. Now the triple turrets aren't wasted from these cruisers. They're actually used on the later Yamato-class battleships as their secondary battery. And Kumano would follow very soon in 1939, getting her own update. And therefore the class is starting to become a truly decent ship. The overall weight is now increasing to around 13,500 tons, and the maximum speed has dropped down to about 35 knots because of the reshaped hull, and of course just the added weight of the new guns and everything else. But she still has her turreted torpedo launchers, carrying up to 24 torpedoes, including reloads. And is now officially a heavy cruiser. So yeah, after the last two in the class were launched, the first two, Mogami and Mikuma, would go in for refit. You can see Suzuya's hull here. It's a little flatter if you look at Mikuma here, circa 1942. You'll see more of a bulge. And both have the 8-inch gun. Thought we'd better put Mikuma up here when we have, because she's not with us very long. They all four are used during the invasion of the Dutch East Indies at the beginning of World War II. And they're used to help sink the Australian cruiser Perth and the U.S. Navy cruiser USS Houston. And all four would be present at the Battle of Midway. During that battle, Mogami and Mikuma would be in formation together, and they would both take evasive action to avoid a submarine and its torpedoes. Unfortunately, they did not avoid each other. Mikuma and Mogami would ram each other, doing pretty significant damage. And while Mogami would limp back home slowly, Mikuma would be a sitting duck for naval bombers from the USS Enterprise and the USS Hornet. And so she would be attacked later that day and sunk. So Mikuma would be the first of the Mogamis to go under just a couple of years after her refit. So again, she wasn't around for much action in the war. Barely had time to enjoy being a heavy cruiser. So what's next for our ships here? So here we are finally with Mogami herself. But definitely in a different guise than when she was initially launched in the mid-1930s. This is in the aircraft cruiser configuration. After she was damaged at Midway through colliding with Mikuma, she would limp back home slowly, finally getting there later that year, and spend over 10 months in dock. And after the losses Japan had at Midway, they decided to turn her into an aircraft cruiser. Now originally, it was considered to actually plate over her entire deck and make her into a light aircraft carrier, but there was neither the time nor the resources to do so. So they kind of left her as a half and half, quite literally. The front half is still a cruiser with the 3 front turrets, but her rear turrets, along with all their magazines, were removed and a small flight deck installed, and where the ammunition, powder, all that for the rear turrets had been, are now bunkers for fuel, munitions for the planes, other facilities, so on and so forth. She could actually operate up to 11 aircraft, although this many was never actually on board her. In fact, she never really operated as a carrier much a decoy some. But anyway, it wasn't until the end of 43 she was ready to go again, and didn't do a whole lot early on. Her next big outing was at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October of 1944. And guess what she did there? Not content to collide with members of her own class, now she rammed the cruiser Nachi, rather severely damaging herself in the process, making herself an easy target for shells from Allied ships and bombs and torpedoes. So, yeep, she sunk. So not a whole lot to it, but I still think I know the carrier, or the half-carrier concept is pretty flawed, honestly, but I still think it's cool as a model. You typically just don't see this setup. Got little planes in the background, little catapults. And still a warship in the front. It just cracks me up. Well, what about the remaining two ships in the class? Suzuya and Kumano. To wrap things up, I thought I'd lay them all out side by side again. To be fair, Mogami had her collision and damage on the 23rd and leading into the 24th. Technically, the coup de grace was delivered by a Japanese destroyer who torpedoed her, but she was a hulk at this point. You know, that's what happened a lot at Leyte Gulf. And, yeah, her sister ships wouldn't have much better fate. Suzuya would be downed a couple of days later on the 25th, not making it out of the battle. Shells, torpedoes, bombs, you know the drill by now. And Kumano would actually, although damaged, make it out. And she would retreat on one working boiler to Manila Bay. And her lease on life would be up on November 25th when she was found out by patrol craft and bombers, and still sporting scars and damage from Leyte Gulf. She too would join her sister ships at the bottom. So kind of like the Takeo class we talked about in the last video, 3 of the surviving ships went down at that battle. I think that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the campaign there. And looking at the models, it's just neat that we have a 1938, 1940, 1942, 1944. Of course, Mogami looks very different, and Kumano looks very different, being in the original configuration. I really like it when they do this. They did the same thing with Furitaka, putting her in 1926 configuration. Of course, Mikuma and Suzuya look quite similar, although there are differences. But yeah, the kind of lackluster, the ambition and the ingenuity and the new technology used behind this class was very innovative for 1934. But again, with any new technology, when they went to test Mogami and Mikuma, they found some pretty big things. Luckily, they were able to learn, and for Suzuya and Kumano, they were able to integrate some improvements, and then, of course, they were able to increase their lethality in the late 30s, early 40s. They were also, probably more importantly, able to increase their stability and just seaworthiness. And then throwing on a flight deck, because why the hell not, I guess. Even though she really never operated her full complement of aircraft or her aircraft in true combat. Oh well, neat idea. And it goes to show you the status of the Navy after defeats like Midway. And there we have it. We're getting to the end. In fact, we just have one more class of cruiser, at least heavy cruiser, to talk about. So next time we'll get to the Tonei class. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you could, please check out some of my other videos. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.